everybody, and welcome to ABA Inside Track, the podcast that's like reading in your car, but safer. I'm your host, Robert Perry Cruz, and with me as always are my fabulous co-hosts.
Hey.
Hey.
Hi.
It's Diana.
It's Jackie.
Hi, guys.
Hi, Rob.
Hi, Rob.
Hey, knock knock.
Who's there?
The interrupting horse.
Interrupting.
Hey!
You know what's funny is I forgot to say the interrupting horse who, and I was like, I don't get it. Oops. I'm not good with my knock knock jokes.
Oh, well, luckily this isn't a podcast about knock knock joke comedy. It's a podcast about behavior analysis and the research that what done stems from our science. And we're currently in the middle of Supervision September, the Supervision September to remember. We are doing something different in September. We are talking about supervision by having a good old-fashioned book club. We read The Supervisor's Guidebook by Reid, Green, and Parsons, 2012, and we hope you did too. If you didn't, well, you're going to learn a lot of things, and then we hope you go out and buy the book and then read it after the fact, because it is a great book on supervising folks in human services and a great book for any of you BCBAs who are serving as supervisors.
This book was self-published.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. I didn't know this. I was looking at it, and I was like, oh, he self-published it. It's kind of a clever idea.
Yeah, I noticed it when I had to do the bibliography, and I was like, what's the publisher?
Right? I was like, In Spirit, and I was like, what is
The same
this
company that you
publisher?
all work for?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, I get it.
Clever.
Good for them.
Yeah. So this is episode 39, and we are going to be talking about the next segment of the book. We're going to be talking specifically about how to train people as a supervisor. Then we'll also be talking about how to follow up with people you have trained as their supervisor.
Totally.
Now, last time, just for a quick review, we talked about what? Quick pop quiz. Other co-hosts.
Oh, I'm ready. I'm going to
What
win.
did we talk about last time?
We talked about...
What we're going to talk about this time?
Well, we started talking about this, yes. But what you guys mostly talked about two other... We kind of primed the pump in terms of the talking about training.
Okay.
I talked about the 7 steps of evidence-based supervision.
Mm-hmm.
And I talked about specifying staff work responsibilities.
Yes. And if you would like to hear more about that, then listen to the last episode, because we don't have time to go into it now.
We're much too busy.
It's a chock-a-block of supervision information, and we don't want to miss a thing.
Don't want to close our eyes.
I figured someone would sing it, right? So,
especially if you're driving.
Right?
So what I will mostly be talking about with some hope, we'll have some tips from both of you is how to train. And we talked a little bit about it at the end of last episode, but we're going to go into it in more detail. So the way to effectively train people, there are a lot of words that this will be called, a lot of terms that we use when we talk about effective training.
Words.
Train and hope is not one of them. Shotgun training is not one of them. Those are not good ways to train. Do you know train and hope?
Yeah, I love that one.
You love train and hope?
Yeah.
I'm going to stand here and give you guys a 2-hour lecture. I really hope everything works out when I'm done and you all learn this and do a great job with it.
That's my most favorite because basically you've just put yourself in a hole of bad training, right?
Everyone's zoned out 15 minutes
Well, there's just
in.
no application,
Yeah.
right?
There's
Right.
no
Like you may
application.
have written a great training,
Oh, yeah.
but you have no idea if it's going
Right.
to generalize.
You're just hoping.
Yeah. And depending on whether you put in activities in the middle of the training or chances for folks to participate, they may have zoned you out 30 minutes into your training. So they really didn't even hear what you had to say.
Doing the glazy eye, uh-huh.
Yeah. What time is it?
Or actively sleeping.
Oh, yeah.
Oh.
That's actually only happened to me one time.
Oh, I must be real boring.
And man, I lost my stuff. I should have read the Supervisor Guidebook because I probably was...
Do you just go stand next to them and talk real loud?
No, I called them out.
Oh.
Hey, are you sleeping, someone? Which you're not
Let me give you some
supposed to do,
feedback.
right?
Wake up.
You're not supposed to do that. So I've learned I would not do that again.
Oh.
What's shotgun training?
Shotguns training is I'm going to tell you as many things as possible in as short amount of time as possible in the hope that you learn at least some of these things. So it's you just kind of blast your training out into the group, and you sort of hope some of it keeps.
Diarrhea training.
Ew.
Gross.
Sorry, guys. But
What's that one? You chase after them while they go to the bathroom.
Right.
Let me tell you more about this training. We're going to write our own book. So the best way to train is behavior skills training, or as it was referred to in this book, sort of competency-based training. That's a hard one.
What is it, Rob?
Competency-based training, evidence-based supervision. All these things kind of roll together.
Right.
So they don't actually talk in the book about behavior skills training, though I think most training literature nowadays just says behavior skills training or BST. So I'm probably just going to keep using that term because it's an easy one to use.
BST training?
BST training.
Oh my god.
No, I didn't say that, did I?
You didn't say that.
Oh,
no.
thank God.
No.
Oh.
But I think competency-based training makes sense given the background of the previous chapters in this book. That's what we're building upon. We wanted to establish work-based performance objectives for the staff, and then from there it would make sense that your training would be competency-based.
Yes.
BST training.
No, I won't say it. Please
You
tell
didn't
me to
say
stop
it. You
the
didn't
I'll
say
stop
it.
the
I was just
recording.
teasing you.
I'll delete everything. I'll burn it all down if I say that.
So
I'd be
throw
so
it in the
embarrassed.
fire.
So last time when we ended, we talked a lot about why is the regular means of training that you've probably seen, if you've been in the field long enough, have been trained in some of these less effective ways. Why are they so crummy? And we're not going to reiterate all the points in detail, but I do want to quickly talk about why behavior skills training and competency-based training is important. So when you start in a new organization, you start in a new job, many of the trainings that you're going to be having, you may have a lot of staff that have never worked in human services before, so they have no idea what they're doing, and there's a lot of things they have to learn. They certainly don't know how to perform the job proficiently. So a lot of the trainings where let's sit in a big lecture hall and we'll talk to you about all the things you need to do, and then we'll hope you do a good job. That's asking a lot of people. It's like, here's a bunch of stuff you've never done in your life. I hope these 3 hours teach you everything you need to know to be a good employee, so I don't have to fire you in a week.
Well, that's traditional training, right?
Yes.
So that's what they would call it in the textbooks. And that's kind of how we get our CEs, unfortunately,
Exactly.
right? People right now are in our traditional training model. We're not requiring you to do anything, although I would love it if I found out who was listening to the Supervision podcast and then showed up at your workplace. Hi, are you doing the 7 steps of evidence-based supervision? Let me see. But even us right now.
Yeah, it's one of the reasons I didn't really want to do a lot of quizzes. We just do a secret code word if you want to apply for CEs, because you could do a quiz and you could pass the quiz, but I know that's not the same thing as having a real knowledge and understanding of how to implement these tactics.
Right.
Plus, we're also doing this as a means of discussing something that you would then read and have to practice yourself. So that's where we're coming at it from.
We're providing the information piece.
Yes, exactly. Another reason that sort of the traditional training model doesn't work very well is usually new hires don't have a lot of time to get all that training. Like I said, you got the 3 hours, you get the 1 day supervision, and then here's hope for the best.
You just hope.
You just
right?
hope.
There's just
You
only
train and
so
hope.
much you can absorb at one time,
Mhm.
particularly if you don't have a lot of experience in that area. You just can't understand. Like, I could sit through a day-long lecture on how to give spinal surgery, but I am not going to be successful
No.
at it.
You'll remember the first couple slides and the last couple slides, and then everything in between will just be a big blur.
Even if you get the
Ta-da!
slides.
Yeah.
Even if you get the slides, you'll be like, what?
Yeah. A lot of times in the traditional training model, when you're starting in a new position or you have a bunch of supervisees, they're learning a lot of information that's not actually even relevant to doing the job. It's a lot of orientation. Here's where to go for the bathroom. Here's how to do your time card. It's not even like, here's how to actually effectively work with people.
I want to be part of the training that's here's how you go to the bathroom.
Here's where the bathroom is.
Well, OSHA, you do need to wash your hands.
That's true.
That's true. That's
you need that part.
awesome.
And then finally, a lot of times when you have new hires, even if you do, hey, you know what? You had a really good, quick 2 hours. Here's 2 or 3 ways to do your job. Everyone picks it up because it's an easy enough skill, maybe. You still are in the human services field where, as we know, as behavior analysts, you are always learning new skills, which means you are always teaching new skills to your staff. So the traditional training of here's all the stuff you need to know, that a lot of that stuff's going to be invalid in 2-3 years. You have to train everybody again. But if you're not planning on how to do that effectively, you probably won't, which means you'll have staff using I worked with someone once who referred to it as old school ABA, which I sort of took to mean I haven't learned how to do anything differently since I was originally trained in this job. Unfortunately, they'd sort of gotten the impression that they learned how to do a bunch of skills and other people had come and told them other things that maybe just the way they presented it sounded wrong or didn't make sense, but they really believed that they learned how to do all this stuff, and everything that they'd been shown since then was just different and weird and wasn't applicable to them. And I don't think it was their fault. I think that was just how they'd been trained. It had been the traditional model. It had been very brief. and had been sort of like, now do your best for years and years and years. And, I don't blame staff when some random person comes in and says, I'm going to teach you new training. It's a little scary because you've had enough supervisors who've done it wrong for so long that you don't believe them. It takes a lot to buy that trust into staff who've been in an agency for a long time. It's all our fault, everybody. It's never your staff's fault.
That's true.
So you need to use evidence-based training. The knowledge of the skills are important, but being able to competently and proficiently engage in the trained skill is all that matters at the end of the day. We as BCBAs need to be able to talk about what we're doing as well as do it. Your staff, most of the staff you supervise, don't necessarily need to. It's great if they can define all the verbal operants, but you really just need them to be able to engage in training of the verbal operants with consumers. You want them to know as much as you can, but again, the doing is more important than the saying. It's, verbal behavior is not the same as nonverbal behavior, right?
True.
When you're engaged in this performance training or behavior skills training, there are 5 steps. Number 1, describe what it is you want your supervisees to do. That's pretty easy, right?
Mm-hmm.
Number 2, give them a written summary of the skill. Number 3, you need to demonstrate the skill, or you need to have an assistant who can demonstrate the skill, though it's best if you yourself, the trainer, can demonstrate the skill to all of the staff who are watching you.
I think it's also really important in the written instructions to provide a rationale for why you're doing it. I think sometimes everyone that's implied, but I think we should be really specific about having that rationale for why we're learning this skill, when are we going to use it, so that when they go out in the world and maybe it's a particularly challenging skill, they have the rationale so they're more likely to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I very much agree. Then after you've demonstrated the skill, the staff must also then engage in this skill. They have to perform it in front of you, and you need to make sure that they are performing it competently. So they engage in it, you give them corrective feedback or supportive feedback, whichever makes sense for how well they did, and you do this over and over. They do this over and over until they reach a level of competence. And if they've done that in only a training setting as opposed to in vivo, guess what? You're going to go repeat steps 4 and 5 in vivo with real clients or consumers.
In the real life. In
the real world. Because doing it in a training session is important.
It's a fantasy.
But you also need to know that your staff can actually perform these skills. And we'll talk about that a little bit at the end of this section and then when we talk about monitoring.
Yeah, because, I have been watching so much Top Chef, right?
You have.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I've been
for years and years and years and years.
I've been watching so much Bachelor in Paradise.
I don't know if that analogy is going to work.
Where's this going, guys?
Just kidding.
Because I can talk about all the different cooking techniques, but can I actually perform them, Rob?
I don't want to say no. I haven't watched that show. You cook a lot of things. You might have learned some of them from the show.
Yeah, but I don't cook things like they cook on Top Chef.
Creme fraiche.
Yeah, I'm not cooking anything fancy like that, right? So you can observe something all day long, and you might be able to gain some level of knowledge. But if it's an action that you need to perform, you need to practice performing it in actuality in order for that skill to become reinforced and part of your behavioral repertoire.
Yes.
That's true.
Yes. But let's talk about this in a little more detail.
Sure.
So when we talk about telling staff what they need to do, why they need to do it, and giving them a written description, we talked about that the last episode, what that could look like. It really can be as simple as just a checklist, a performance checklist. Let's say we're teaching our supervisees how to run a task analysis. Here are the steps of a task analysis. Those are all over the place. Get them out of Cooper, Heron, and Heward. Write your own from your own notes from when you were in grad school. It's very simple to create something like that. And then you have a tool that you yourself can use later when you're monitoring staff. Staff know what they're expected to do, and you have an easy time then knowing, did you do it or did you not do it, of these different steps in your checklist. So that's one good way to do it. Every staff should get one. Please don't just say, here is a binder in which all the information you need to know is. That's in my office. You can come look at it anytime you want to.
Nobody's looking at it.
Yeah.
You probably aren't even looking at it.
No.
It's just going to be all dusty in the corner.
You have to have given it to staff. And even if they don't get too much, 2012, I guess, was sort of a little before. I think some of the cloud-based services came in play because they don't talk about electronics too much or how to do things electronically. But even if you have a central like Google Drive or Box or OneDrive, whatever you have, Also give people a paper copy so that they have something tangible that they can look at, that they can keep in a workspace. They can post, put it in a bag. They can hold it.
Love it.
They can smell it, smell the paper. Know that you lovingly crafted this checklist for them. I don't know how many of you out there work in a place where you are doing the training as a supervisor, but you are not also in charge of every other aspect of the clients and the staff you work with. The book posits that maybe that could happen to you. I know for me, when I would train staff, they mostly were always then staff who would work directly with me with consumers that I was also working directly with. So a lot of if you don't know what to do, find out piece didn't really apply to me. But I suppose you could be in a really big organization and you're the BCBA and they're like, teach everyone to do ABA. And then we've got a psychologist who makes all the behavior plans and you're sort of in a terrible ethical situation already. But hey, you're trying to work it out. So you might not know the plans or know exactly what it is you're supposed to be training your staff. Guess what? You have to find out what that is. So if you are in such a bad situation, God bless you. I don't want to be in that situation. But you
quit your job.
Yeah, probably quit. But you do need to know what it is you're demonstrating. So I'm not in charge of this, so I'm just going to show you what I've done. I don't really know how to do it is not an excuse. And that's no way to start a training because as we talk about later, your staff will also then not want to follow you. They will think you are incompetent. So if that means get another person to help you with the training, if that means you need to hunt down the person who wrote this behavior plan and be like, you need to show me what this plan means because I'm reading it and it's not very good. If you need to rewrite the whole thing so that your staff know what it is because the one that's written isn't any good and you want to summarize it, do what you have to do, but it has to make sense. And you have to understand it. If you don't understand it, your supervisees will not understand it as well. So step 1, don't be in that situation ever. But step 2, if you are, find the answers. Don't just sort of wing it and show up the day of the training like, I don't really know how to do this, but I'm pretty good. I'll probably figure it out. Because maybe you will, but it won't look good. Your staff won't be able to follow your demo very well. Do you guys have like a lot of checklists you like to use when you're doing training?
Checklists.
Okay.
Sometimes I've used video, a video instruction, so they can watch it so that I don't have to do it over and over and over again and then have a checklist so that I know that they're hearing it and seeing it and they can go back and look at it.
Yeah.
But that takes a lot of work.
Yeah, but it is, when we talk about the next part, the demonstration, when you are demonstrating it, a video is kind of a cool way to show the skill, especially if you're in the video, because then you get the benefit of the staff know you can engage in the skill, but you also have a permanent product that will always look the same. So if staff want to review it later, they're not going to.
You only have to get it right one time.
You only have to get it right one time. Exactly.
And you can edit it.
Or edit your best steps. Step 1 was great. Step 2 through 10 were good. I'll get my best takes. Yeah.
You were in like a different shirt and every piece of it.
It's like all split, and you're like,
Your eyes keep opening and closing. You're in different areas of the room.
I love those. Or you like turn, in those videos when they're like, I'm facing the camera, and then I'm gonna turn slightly and face the camera over here, but then the camera moves.
Yeah, so creepy.
So that could be one way to do your demonstration. Otherwise, just do. You're just gonna do it real time, live theater. You're engaging in the skill. You're showing how to do a TA. You're demonstrating how to set up incidental teaching opportunities. But again, make sure you can engage in this skill. I think a lot of us are fortunate in that many of the people that we supervise are training. We're training in kind of the same couple areas over and over again. So we probably are masters of how to demonstrate those skills. I mean, how many discrete trial trainings do you guys think you've done in your careers at this point?
I don't know. A lot. Quite a few.
Yeah. I can't count.
It's a number, I'm sure. I know
I got rotating those stimuli down, though.
See, I still can't rotate the stimuli. I tell the staff, I'm like, I might do this wrong, so.
I can do it in my sleep, I think.
I'm bad with spatial awareness. I can do the rest of it.
It's okay, Rob.
In any case, you have to be able to show the staff the correct work behaviors they must engage in. And again, if you can't do it yourself, find someone who can and have them demonstrate it. But it's really better if you can do it.
You need to have some street cred with your staff as well.
Yep.
You want them to see that you can do what you're going to be asking them to do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So you've demonstrated it to everybody. They have a written copy. And now it's time for the practice and the feedback. Now, most of the time when you are engaged in training staff, you'll probably be training a number of staff. So you'll be doing this in like a training room or a separate area. You won't be in the residence. You won't be at the school. If so, that's fine. Just do role play with the staff, in which case you might have them group up with a copy of the checklist that they're going to be looking at, and they'll sort of watch the other partner engage in the skill. You'll be sort of wandering around, taking turns looking at each person. Please make sure that as much as these can feel like this is taking forever, they probably will always take forever, because you are making sure everyone is engaging in each step of these new trained behaviors. So don't just do the that looks good to me. Everyone do good? Did you all think you did well with this new skill you don't really know how to do yet? You all think you did? Great.
Yeah,
It is helpful to have extra trainers.
Yes.
For this purpose.
If you have a big group, the more trainers, the better. But if you have, a group of 3, it shouldn't take very long. If you have a group of 50, you're going to want a bunch of other people, because you'll never get that training
And
done.
your trainees will get bored.
Yes, they will get very bored. And they don't know enough yet to really be able to proficiently rate each other's performances.
No, they will mutiny.
Yeah. So while you're engaged in this role play with hopefully a smaller group, you're giving feedback. Now, typically feedback should be given in the moment, after the staff have performed the skill. And this is whether it's role play or whether you're actually doing in vivo training. We'll talk more about this in another episode, because there is a lot to giving feedback. But basically what it boils down to is you are immediately informing the staff what was performed accurately and what wasn't performed accurately, and therefore what they would need to do differently. I know for me, when I give feedback, I typically actually like to tell my trainees, my supervisees, what kind of feedback I'm going to be focusing on. So, hey, everybody, I know this is a new skill. I know you want to do it the best you possibly can. I'm going to focus a lot on corrective feedback, because right now your goal is to do it right as fast as possible. So I'm going to, certainly I'd say positive things to them, but the focus is going to be on what they need to do differently if they're not performing differently.
I really like that. I love that you let them know beforehand. Do you ever have times where you're like, okay, I'm just going to focus on what you're doing well?
Oh, yeah. I usually tell them, when I am doing this here, it's corrective feedback, because you want to do this right. I want you to do it right here. When I am actually observing you with the consumer or with your student, I'm going to focus more on the positive stuff. If there are things you need to fix, I'll certainly let you know. But in those situations, my focus is on all the things you're probably doing right. Because there are a billion things you're supposed to do in vivo, whereas right now, you need to do 5 steps. I think you can do 5 steps correctly. If you can't, I'd like to help you do them as quickly as possible, because I'm sure you would like to leave and go do something else too.
All right. Yeah, I like that. I like that a lot.
I think what's the ratio now? Is it 8-to-1 positive things to corrective things in many settings?
I thought it was 12-to-1.
Maybe it seems to get high.
Yeah,
it seems to
right.
Get higher.
It's like 45-to-1.
It's not 1-to-1.
Yeah, I'm not necessarily that good with that.
Yeah, you want to focus on saying more positive things.
Right.
These are the things you did well versus here's the thing you need to correct. However, I think when you're in certainly a role play setting, I'm not as worried about that, because everyone knows why they're there. I want people to feel comfortable, because I'm training them once. I'm probably going to train them again. I want people to feel comfortable with me. They're like, we're here to get this right. I'm here to help you. We're going to do it. This is going to be awesome. And then when they're doing it in real life, which is probably scarier, I want to focus on I'm being supportive. I see all the things you're doing right, because I'm sure even if you're doing a couple things wrong, you're doing a lot more right than wrong.
Yeah,
right.
I like that.
Yeah, that's me though. I know that there are different, I still have people who tell me that the shit sandwich is still an acceptable way to give people feedback.
In this book, it says so.
They talk about, they did.
Yeah, and
did
I'm
they?
like,
I wasn't sure if I
in
misread
book,
that.
No, in the book they talk about the compliment sandwich. I like how you call it the shit
It's the
sandwich.
shit sandwich.
But I don't necessarily I disagree with it. I don't use the compliment sandwich.
I think they've moved past that maybe even since this book was published.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
they would have been writing this probably like 2010, 2011.
Yeah. What I like is they say provide an empathetic statement.
Mm-hmm.
I like that over the what you did right, because that's nice. Saying, hey, I know what you're doing is hard.
Yeah.
Do it.
You're probably really nervous about this meeting.
Right. So that seems nice, but I don't agree with saying what you did something well, what you need to work on, then what you're doing well again.
You're doing a great job.
Well,
I know you're
down
making
more than
effort.
that anyway.
Yeah.
You didn't run any of the steps on the checklist correctly.
I like your shirt.
Right. I mean,
you smell great.
But I guess I smell great. That's what they remember, right?
Well, all they pay attention to is they hate everything I did, in which case you just said 2 positive things that they don't care about, the individual doesn't care about, or they only remember the positive thing you ended with, so they didn't pick up the fact they did something wrong. That's what I hear.
Or it makes any of the nice things they said seem disingenuous, and they no longer trust you.
Yeah. I prefer when I'm training folks, I want them to know. I mean, I have a write-out. I tell them exactly what these steps are going to look like. I let them know we're training to proficiency, because I want them to know what's expected. And at least the feedback I've gotten from folks I've trained, I've only had one person who said they don't like that in the 25, 30 people I've probably trained over the past 3 or 4 years.
I thought you were about to say 25 to 30 years.
No, I'm
thought
that
you
old,
were,
but
man.
I'm not that long a trainer. So in any case, you're giving your feedback and you're training to proficiency, repeating and repeating and repeating as many times as it takes. Now, if you're doing training in the role play setting, like we already said, you have to also train in vivo, which means you will be repeating this again. Sometimes, if you're lucky, you can just train everything in vivo the first time. But again, if you have 10 trainees, 10 supervisees, you're going to have to engage with the training in a different location. You can't just have 10 people surround one poor individual and make them run, a learning program 10 times over and over and over again.
No.
Yeah.
No.
One thing I love about this chapter is they say that staff should never talk for more than 15 or 20 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
I love that. Because have you ever been to a training where it's just like blah, 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 blah,
Yeah.
blah, blah. We're done.
I always feel
Oh,
bad
yeah.
because people listen to a podcast in which that's all we do for.
I know.
So anyway, I have a great activity. Everyone get up out of your cars.
Run around your car.
Find a partner.
Sit back down.
Give yourself some feedback. I'm sitting so well. Check the timer. How many more minutes is this? And you smell great.
But they're doing it because they want to do it, not because they have to.
That's true. You do not have to listen to our show.
Right? Unless you're in class, and then you're getting indirect hours, so it's schoolwork.
Yeah. There's a total benefit to listening to our fabulous show, right? So the basic steps are pretty simple. Say what you're going to do. Have a write-up. Demonstrate. Role play, repeat, repeat, repeat until proficiency. Do that in whatever settings you need to, but it has to at least be an in vivo.
Sure. Yeah, I agree with you.
So the steps themselves are pretty straightforward. Again, a lot of things people want to know is, well, okay, but how do I do this training? What does it actually look like? And there are actually two different ways that Supervisor's Guidebook recommends you do this training. One is a group training, which again, a lot of you will probably end up doing. There's also an individual training. Now, the nice thing about a group training setting is it's usually a little bit more formal. It's a lot easier if you need to train a lot of people in one new skill or maybe two new skills, two related skills. But again, since it is more formal and you have a lot of people, you have to be very well prepared because you have to present the material in a way that's efficient for time. It's going to take a lot longer to go through the proficiency checks. Again, you're going to start the same way with the rationale. Why are we here? What are we learning? You're going to have to do role play because you can't be in vivo with this many people. Again, it's helpful if you have an assistant, but you need to then make sure your assistant is proficient in engaging in the skill. So don't just be like, I need a volunteer to help me out because they don't know what they're doing.
Someone from the audience.
You want somebody who knows what to do, meet with them ahead of time, script it. Because again, you want your demos to look good. You don't want the staff to think, why is this person training me? They don't know what they're doing at any point. So if you're going to have someone good, you're going to have someone help you, make sure they know what they're doing and make sure you've prepped with them and they know what the expectations are for that training. With the role play, like we said, you could use the checklist and give people partners so that they can give some feedback as to, great job, you did steps 1, 2, and 3, but I didn't see step 4. You should try it again. That will help you. However, that does not mean that your supervisees are doing your work for you. You do still need to check in with everybody to make sure that they are getting feedback from you because that's the most important feedback. And again, you want to end your group training by talking about this is when your training is going to be occurring. And since we all know that you need to observe them and supervise them and monitor their performance in vivo, tell them at the end of the training. So everybody, because it's important to engage in the skill when you're with your students, when you're with consumers, I'm going to be coming around the next week and working with you more on this. You've all done so well. I'm sure this is going to be like great, and I'm going to be able to help you with any questions. But don't be surprised if you see me this next week. You don't have to tell them exactly when. We'll talk about why you might not want to say, this is what time I'm coming to see you, Jimmy Jones. But generally, I'm going to come by, and my purpose here is going to be to give you specific feedback in the real-life setting. But let them know. So the staff know it's coming. They're less nervous about it. Because if you just show up again, they'll be like, I thought my training was over. Why are you here? Did I do something wrong? It's probably the first thing they will think.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
One of the things that we've talked about a bunch is if you're in a group training, 15 to 20 minutes of talking, which, again, it shouldn't take you very long to be like, hey, everybody, we're doing TAs. Here are the steps of a TA. Here's why you do a TA. Let me show you how to do a TA. Let's do it. And then it shouldn't take more than 15 to 20 minutes to engage in those first 3 steps anyway. This is where I think a lot of times in group trainings, videos are very helpful because you don't even need to be there. A lot of online learning, I changed almost all my basic training into watch this video where I do the most talking, but I know it's not more than 25 minutes or so because I filmed it as opposed to me talking and going off on a tangent. Like, I don't know now.
Who does that?
And then I can say, all right, now that we're all together, let me show you one more time and let's get right into the training. It saves a lot of time and it gets people engaged in the skill as fast as possible.
There has been research to show that type of classroom training module is effective.
Mm-hmm.
Just saying.
Yeah. Again, I think we're not going to get into videos too much because it's not a part of the book. They mention it and they mention, things like demos, it might be good, or the rationale, it might be good, which is good because I'd already done all those videos. So I was glad that,
you're like,
that they agreed with me. When you're doing training in an individual setting, the nice thing is you can jump right into the working with a consumer, working with a student in vivo. You give them the rationale, you show the demo, you may be able to ask, the classroom teacher or the person who's directly in charge of them for the day, I need 15 minutes this time of day to go over this, and then I'm just going to be with them on the floor, in the setting, in the classroom, wherever you are. And you can engage in all those steps. So it might actually be a lot faster overall, and you have one person, so it's a lot easier to give feedback to one person.
One time I did an 8-hour supervision training for one person.
Ooh.
It was funny.
Like, now let's do an activity.
I did. Actually, I was like, I can't talk for more than 15 to 20 minutes. So let's do an activity together. We'll role play. It was real awkward, but fun.
Yeah. You guys are best friends now.
Mm-hmm. Besties. And I really know that she knows what she's doing.
That's right.
I guess that's true.
Like, we got to fill 8 hours, and some of these activities are meant for 20 minutes with 10 people.
Right?
So
We spent the whole 8 hours.
Good job, man. Nice job. Feedback. I'm glad you did the whole time.
Mm-hmm.
You don't smell as nice as I would like. Thanks for coming.
Thanks for coming.
All right. A couple parts of the chapter that the authors ended on, they have some good issues to be aware of. And I did like this overall in the book. I felt like they had a lot of sort of sections that didn't have to do necessarily with how to monitor your staff, how to train your staff, how to effectively supervise your staff, but they sort of got to that big picture of here are things that you should do and why that are kind of minor tweaks, but that will pay out in the end with all your supervisees loving you and being really good at their jobs. Mm-hmm. So these are a couple of the ones that I picked up, and you guys certainly jump in if you had any of your own that you liked. Never feeling bad that you are putting time into the training with your staff. I know we talked about it last episode, but I know I've been in positions where I have really felt pressure to, could you train less? Could you do this faster? And the answer really is no. If you want me to train people effectively, I need to take however much time it takes to have people reach competency. So don't feel bad. A lot of organizations, they just want to know something was done. Like, did you train them? I don't really actually need to see it. I just need a record that says I trained these people. And if you're in an organization and that's all they care about, you might want to find another job because that's not effective. One of the things that there is research to show is if you can get people competent in role play, there's a really good chance that they will be competent very fast in vivo. Not so much that if they're competent in role play, you assume they're competent in vivo, but that's why you want to put as much time as possible in those role plays, reaching competence.
Right. So is the rule never assume or always assume? Because I forgot.
You don't want to assume that they can...
Never assume.
Never assume
got it.
that
Never
just because they did it with you
assume.
in a classroom, they can do it with a student or in a challenging location.
Never assume.
Never
Okay.
assume.
I remember
Never
that
assume.
now.
Hopefully they can, and if they did a good job in your training, then they probably will, but just in case. You want to be better safe than sorry, right? We talked a little bit about visual media, so they did mention it. It was kind of like, I don't know if this visual media will work.
That's awesome.
Flash forward 5 years later. Yeah, it's fine. Do visual media, folks. They said, watch rationale, watch the supervisor demo, see the written component described, and then meet to do feedback sessions. So
Perfect.
Makes sense, right?
You could always do Skype as a feedback session too. If we're gonna bring this book into this century.
Yeah.
Or not century. I'm like
Decade?
year. Bring it into this year.
A lot of times people really will like this training. So again, kind of the fun take-home point. Most supervisees really like this because they'll see that they're improving fast. Now, what's a better way to teach everyone, hey, do the thing I'm telling you? It's to have some amount of reinforcement in they get reinforced by the product, or their behavior gets reinforced by the product.
There you
Nice.
go.
Woo!
I know.
Rob, I like how you corrected your behavior right there. Your shirt is nice.
Oh, I just got all good
Wow,
stuff.
You're great.
nothing corrective there.
No.
Keep going. I need 5 more before you tell me something corrective. A lot of the staff really like the fact that the person supervising them has actually done the training. It lets them feel like they're not like, oh, the supervisor is some sort of a special person and I'm just not important staff member. Because you're a part of it, you can engage in the skill with them. Most people like to know why they're expected to do what it is they're expected to do. And the training's usually less boring because they're up and they're moving and they're engaging in role plays. Most people usually like role plays. Some people kind of hate them or feel a little uncomfortable at first, but after a while, I think most people do sort of enjoy the fact they get to practice in a safe environment. The more proficient your staff are, the more time you are spending telling them what an awesome job they're doing and not just blowing smoke. You really think they're doing an awesome job because you are observing them doing an awesome job. And that is going to make you a supervisor that they enjoy training with and they enjoy working with. That's how to train people.
And that's how you do it.
Now, the only downside with training people is when you're having a problem at work, training will only work if the problem has to do with the fact that there is a skill that your staff don't know how to engage in. If something is going on different than that skill, like they're not showing up at all or they hate you, more training won't necessarily solve the problem. So don't think this is some sort of a panacea for all workplace problems. It's a lot of them, but not all of them.
Right. Lack of motivation is one of those problems that you may not solve with behavior skills training.
Yeah. All right. So why don't we go into our first secret code word? So if you are listening to our show, guess what? We are ACE approved continuing education providers, which means that you can get Supervision continuing education credits for listening to this episode. And you do that by listening and filling out a form on our website, and there's a link in the show notes, and by knowing 2 secret code words that we will spread throughout this episode. So we're going to do one right now. And that first secret code word is ferret. Ferret, ferret, the small rodent creature you can keep as a pet.
They're adorable.
Or verb, to search for something and find it. Dig in. Ferret. Ferret. And you know what? I've also talked for a really long time because unfortunately we found so much information that the chapters that were supposed to be split up were not. So now I get to talk again about how to monitor staff afterwards. So before I go into talk about staff monitoring, why don't we take a little break? We'll be right back.
Hey, ABA Inside Trackers. Are you interested in being a behavior analyst and you're not yet? If so, I really would recommend looking into the Regis College Masters in Science and Applied Behavior Analysis program. Our 2016 pass rates for first-time test takers of the BCBA exam was 90%. We think this is a true testament to our program. In addition, we're going to be starting an on-campus autism center in the summer of 2017. This is going to allow our graduate students on-hands learning right at our college, and you will receive partial tuition remission if you work at the center, which is pretty amazing. We also offer paid clinical placements and graduate assistantships starting in our students' first year, where all of our grad students are working in the field either part-time or full-time. I find you that job. That is part of my job. We also are approved by the BACB to provide intensive practicum, so students will complete 750 hours of an intensive practicum across their time at Regis. All of our faculty are PhD-level BCBAs with strong applied and research backgrounds in ABA, and all have published papers in respected peer-reviewed journals. We ensure small class sizes so that all students receive personalized attention from their professors and advisors, are easily accessible to meet with students. 2 more really great things that I want to highlight about the Regis program is that we host an invited lecture series at Regis each year, which involves inviting outside experts in ABA to speak on specialized topics relating to practicing ABA. Last summer, we completed an international service trip to Iceland. This trip enabled students to learn more about providing culturally competent care to diverse populations. Students and alums worked with children diagnosed with an autism spectrum disorder and provided parent and teacher trainings for 11 days. This service trip occurs every other year, and the next trip will be in the summer of 2018. And finally, we have a great location. We're just 12 miles from the center of Boston. We currently have rolling admission. We're accepting students until we reach capacity for the fall of 2017. Please check us out at www.regiscollege.edu.
Okay, and we're back. Nice little break. Now we're going to get into the next part of training, which is the monitoring of the training after the fact. Just because you train people doesn't mean they'll always be able to engage in the skills, so you need to be monitoring your staff going forward. And it's not just about making sure they still know the training. A lot of the performance monitoring really has to do with much of your supervision. And really, the book does make it pretty clear. If you train your staff well and then monitor their performance, you're doing almost everything you need to do to be a good supervisor. You know that the staff can engage in the skills, and you're doing something to make sure that they are still engaging appropriately in all of their work-related skills, that they're having a good time on the job as well. You know, you're nipping a lot of problems that can occur in the bud. So, in the butt,
In the
right?
butt.
In the butt.
In the butt.
Well, this, if you've already done the work of planting the seeds and ensuring that your vegetables are growing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
you're-
watering them.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's what I was about to say, is
Oh.
that's part of the monitoring process here now, right? Is the overall continued watering and pruning of what you've already set in motion.
Yep.
To grow.
Exactly. So the big questions you're asking yourself when you're monitoring your staff are, was my training and everything I've shown them effective? Do they need more training in any sort of skill? Is there any other supervisory action that needs to be happening? And if you're kind of thinking of those questions as you monitor your staff, you are pretty much doing everything you need to do. You're going to skip a lot of awful problems. So if you're new to supervising, do all these things and you'll never have a problem ever again. And if you're old to supervising and you've been doing it wrong, I'm so sorry. It's going to take a while. But don't worry, you'll get there. I like the way you smell. It's going to be fine. So there are two main ways that you can monitor staff. One is formal monitoring, and the other is
Informal.
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 I win.
Was what I was looking
Damn it.
for. So when you're engaged in formal monitoring, they look very similar in a lot of ways, but formal monitoring should really be, I am here, I am specifically here to supervise and systematically observe some specific aspect of my staff work performance. Hey, we just did that training on preference assessments. I'm here to watch you do a preference assessment. A lot of times you might actually have told your staff that you will be coming to engage in that supervision so that they know it's happening. You're going to be collecting actual data in your monitoring, usually using whatever checklist you showed to your staff and you're using to make sure that they're proficient. You just use that again.
Love
Right?
that.
Perfect.
Don't make a new one. Just use the same one.
Surprise.
Now you're going to use this data. The goal is not to sit on this data. Most crappy supervisors take a lot of data. They never do anything with it. They don't know what it shows them. And then they don't make any decisions based on it. I mean, that's anyone who's crappy at this job. It doesn't
Right.
use their data. You have to use your data. You should have data that is very focused. It should be on a specific area of staff performance. So that checklist of the skill you want to make sure they're engaged in, right? It has to be objective. Is what I think should be happening? And I know it is happening because it's easy to tell. It's an objective skill, right?
Staff love that too, right? Because then it's not
Oh, yeah.
wishy-washy. They're
Yeah.
like, oh yeah, this is exactly what I need to do and nothing else.
I don't feel like your pep was really
Right.
there. Like,
Where's your flair?
Where's your flair? Exactly. You want to get accurate info, and if you don't have something objective, it's just going to be a bunch of hooey. To find that term, if you will.
Hooey.
And then also consistent. Hey, use the same freaking checklist over and over again, because then you're looking at the same behavior over and over again. If you keep changing what it is you're observing, you don't have a consistent means of doing it, you're just getting a lot of information that's going to change a bit from supervision monitoring to supervision monitoring, and you're not gathering any information about the staff. It's frustrating to staff. It's going to be frustrating to you too. You can use like simple count sheets. You can have a checklist of this is what should be happening in the 30 minutes I observe. This is my checklist for preference assessment, task analysis, discrete trial. I'm just going to check it off as I go. I always was a big fan of the whole like, hey, everybody, we just learned this skill. I'm going to observe everyone for 15 minutes on this skill sometime today. I assume this skill is happening because it's a skill that could happen at any point, and I have a checklist. You either do it or you don't. If you don't do it, then I'll give you feedback and we'll work on it until you're proficient, and then I'll come back tomorrow. If you do it in the first 2 minutes, awesome, I'm done. We can move on with life. Most people like to do it because then I would go away.
Negative reinforcement.
Yep.
Well, I mean, I think they just, when they knew I was there just to be like, I have a checklist, I think they were like, I just want that to be checked as fast as possible. I'm going to say it's a reward. Now, some guidelines on how often to monitor using formal monitoring. Again, if you've just taught a new skill to staff, do a lot more monitoring to start. And then as staff demonstrate proficiency in both the role play and in vivo settings, you can sort of space it out a little bit more. You want to give that corrective feedback as early as possible and then reduce your observations of that skill. If you're just taking, if you're taking a corrective action, so someone was engaged inappropriately in some skill and you had to retrain them, same rule applies. Observe them more to start. If you don't think something's happening correctly, you might want to observe it more often, again, to start. So really, if you're worried about something, do it a lot. If it's more everything's been going well these past few times, give yourself a schedule if that helps, but you just want to be checking in with folks. It doesn't need to be nonstop or constantly. Again, if you've done your job and told staff that you will be doing formal monitoring, they know what it is you're looking for, they will probably like being trained and like being supervised by you because they know it's coming, they expect it, they know you're going to be fair about it, they know you're not just there to tell them how bad they are. So again, you really should be telling them why you're observing, what it is they should be engaged in throughout your various trainings, because you're going to have more than just the one. Another tool that you can use is informal monitoring. Now, again, informal monitoring is not really going to be, I'm sitting to look at you doing something and I have a checklist. This is more like I just happen to be here and I'm just checking in for a few minutes, see how things are going. They're quick observations of ongoing performance. If staff are doing a good job, and you see that within 5 minutes, just tell them, hey, I love that you're doing this, move on. You do not need to give them a lot of corrective feedback. It's a good thing to do when even if you don't have a formal observation going on or you haven't trained anything recently, but you're on site, it's a great time to do some informal monitoring.
Yeah, because you need to be there anyway, chances are, to see the varying students or clients that you oversee. So you can also plan to see staff who need more assistance more often as you're observing students, or try to have them schedule with particular clients. I also think it's beneficial to see your staff working with others. If they always work with one student, try to get a chance to see them working with someone else, because that can really help round out their skill set if they can get feedback in that way.
Mm-hmm. And it reduces reactivity.
Exactly.
Right, so if you're always in there, they're more likely to engage in behavior that they would typically engage in, and less than like, oh, Rob's here, he's doing a formal checklist, I need to do the best. I remember one place I worked a long time ago as a therapist. Someone would be like, oh, this supervisor's coming, and instantly everything was cleaned up, and then everyone was doing their job to like the most optimal performance, and then when they walk by, everything just fell apart again. It was just because they never were there. And so when they were there, everything was beautiful. Yeah. It was pretty funny, actually.
Oh, that's sad.
Yeah, but don't worry, it got fixed.
Yeah, so that is one of the pros of the informal monitoring, is that you're there already. It's a great way to give lots of positive feedback because you're not necessarily looking for something bad. I mean, you may sort of be wondering, hey, I wonder what happens if they don't know I'm going to be observing. So you may kind of have that in the back of your mind. You are not. If you can intervene, but the authors really recommend that if you think there's a problem from your informal monitoring, just come back and do formal monitoring at another time. Don't use that opportunity because you don't have your checklist. You weren't really ready to watch what was going on. Maybe something kind of off was happening that day. So just plan to come back and do a formal monitoring if you're worried about something.
As long as it's not a safety hazard.
Yeah, what's a safety hazard? You're going to want to help out with that, certainly. Jackie, you mentioned staff reactivity being a problem when doing monitoring. Again, if you're always kind of, in the room, staff are much less reactive to your presence, so that's always a positive thing. Also, if you want to, informal monitoring is kind of a great follow-up. So, like, I did my formal monitoring. Staff knew it was happening this week, so they didn't know when to prepare, but maybe they're still a little more on their toes than they would be on a random day. Yeah. If you're ever worried about that, come do your formal monitoring, go to a meeting, and come back and do some informal monitoring. If you come back and in 5 minutes you're like, yep, everyone's doing exactly what they were doing from when I formally monitored them an hour ago, you're probably okay.
Yeah.
And you also get another chance to be like, just coming in to tell you all that you're fabulous and I love how you're doing X, Y, and Z, because you want to be specific with your feedback. And everyone loves you and they want to be supervised by you, right? The book was pretty clear, probably don't do covert monitoring. They mentioned
I agree with that.
Overt versus covert monitoring. And I don't think there's much to go into because it really is, if you are doing covert monitoring, so you're secretly monitoring your staff, the odds are they know you're monitoring them.
Right.
They're not stupid. I used to think I was so smart. I'd sit at a table with my checklist and be like, who knows what I'm doing? But I'm secretly watching you out of the corner of my eye. And I stopped doing that because I was like, like, why don't I just go watch them? If I'm worried about something, I'll do. Or if I want to supervise, I'll go supervise. If I have stuff to do at the table, I'll work on what I'm doing at the table.
Right. Yeah, I think then it's less like sneaky behind your back. It seems more of a collaborative effort if you're always telling them what you're doing, and less like, oh yeah, I'm not watching you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Plus, then if you need to give feedback, it's awkward.
Yeah.
So like, I was watching it the other day, even though I didn't look like it.
I think the covert monitoring they suggest is if you think something like horrible is happening, like your staff are abusing the consumers or they're stealing things, then maybe you would do, like a nanny cam or something.
Yeah, because those things wouldn't happen if you were there, hopefully. Right? Like,
hopefully they're not happening at
right.
all.
But if they are happening,
not at all.
They're probably not going to be happening when you're there.
Yeah. You're supervising to help your staff. You are not supervising to catch them. So if you supervise folks because you want to find out all the ways they're doing a bad job, you are not really being a very supportive supervisor, and you're probably not going about things correctly. And a lot of these will really help out with your staff acceptance of observing, because nobody wants to be observed. I still don't like being observed. I understand I need to be observed when I'm doing new skills, but I still kind of hate it. If they know that you're going to be monitoring them, if they know what you will be monitoring, what they're looking for, they're going to accept the monitoring better than if you just sort of show up and you're like, I'm watching stuff. I don't know what, but I'll give you feedback on it. Nobody likes that. It's kind of scary. Please make sure you greet your staff before you supervise them. Even if you're formally monitoring them, you can come say hi directly. Even if you just know you're going to do some informal monitoring because you have a couple minutes here or there and you just want to check in, still say hi to everybody. Hey, everyone, what's going on? How's it going? Yeah, everyone doing good? I hate supervisors who just sort of like sneak in and watch me because it just is creepy. And I just feel like you're here to catch me doing something wrong. You hate me. Well, I hate you. And it just becomes like a big thing, like a we versus them. It's very easy to do.
Yeah, it's true.
And also, if something bad is happening, so, they're not engaged in the skill correctly and you're giving them feedback, but like, something harmful is happening or something that could be embarrassing. So I'm thinking more like a challenging behavior episode, or a student starts throwing up. You don't need to be like, I'm still here to monitor you. Help out the staff. Make sure that everything is safe. Perhaps you're a problem. Perhaps you're the student's reactive to your presence and they're not behaving appropriately. Maybe you should just be like, you know what? I think they're having a hard time with me today. Why don't I come back and watch you all later? This isn't a good time. Don't just sit there with your checklist and just sort of nod and like, keep going. Staff don't like it. It's not a fair assessment of their skills. And, your job should either be helping them or go away. Like, that's what you should really be doing in those situations. If you're like, oh, but I want to see my staff, and I've done this, I want to know what happens when things aren't going well, when it hits the fan. I want to make sure they can handle themselves. Then come back at a time when that's what your purpose is, monitoring them in a stressful time or a time is challenging. Don't wait for something to randomly happen that they may never have dealt with, and your monitoring their ability to do discrete trial is irrelevant at this time.
Right. That's a good point. I think that's a really good point, because I think as a young supervisor that happened to me, I was like, oh, there's a problem behavior happening, and I would just be like, okay, I'm going to see how you do this, which I probably should have put my stuff down, helped a little bit, then faded myself out, and then later had someone call me when an episode was happening, right? So next time there's an episode happening, give me a call, I'll come in, and I'll try to be a little more, unobtrusive? Yeah, so I'll still be there. You'll know I'll be there, but I'll be unobtrusive for the students so that I can see how you're doing and then give you feedback. I think that would be next steps. We're all growing as supervisors, so that's what I would do now.
You're supervising. You have a job. Your job is to supervise. So you came to formally monitor something. If that is no longer happening, this might not be a good time for your supervision monitoring.
Yeah. Right. I would like to comment, though, that, I've been working in the home setting. So in that situation, if you're the supervisor, you have a scheduled time that you're going out. Yeah. And you're probably going out for the hour, sort of no matter what happens. So maybe your, inclination was going to be to monitor TAs, but then suddenly there is a big behavior problem that takes most of the hour. Well, then you just have to roll with it. And you modify what your purpose was, but you don't necessarily leave. Now you're there to support the staff in that behavioral moment.
But you wouldn't be like, you just wouldn't sit there and be like, okay.
No.
Yeah.
Usually I give them a few minutes, and if they're like, this happens all the time, this is what we do, and I say, great, keep doing it.
Right.
But if any type of troubleshooting happens, then I'm going to be there to help. Yeah. Offer new ideas and suggestions, or get in there and try it myself and see what. what
I
we
have
can
to
do.
tell you, your TA skill was really terrible while your student was engaged in SIB for the full 5 minutes I was here. You really didn't run any TAs, so it's something to work on, you know?
That's
Anyway, bye.
More TAs.
I'm going to put a camera somewhere in here to secretly watch you. I'm a great supervisor. Thanks.
I'm not doing that.
Don't do any of those things. No. But yes, you have a purpose. It's either to help always to help your staff. How you do it might change. And then finally, when you're giving feedback to staff, as soon as you can give them the feedback, the better. A lot of staff are anxious after watching. If you just watch them and you're like, huh, and then you wander away, that's very scary. Like, oh God, do they think I did a bad job? I mean, what's the problem? If you can't give them feedback in the moment, like I always try to do like my positive things. If there's something corrective I want to talk about that I think will take time, but they're working with a student or they're in the middle of something or it's a shift change, I may say something like, there were 1 or 2 things I know I wanted to touch base on. Why don't we do that at blank, blank, blank? And I set up a time so I can meet with them. And then I focus on the great things. And then like I saw 1 or 2, I saw this and this. I want to talk more about that, but you know what? Let's do it later.
Right.
If you need to, you always can. Always end with, I would say something positive. And then if you need to say something else, let them know you have something you want to talk about it later. And finally, before you are done, say, hey, it was great seeing you. Bye. And you leave. I used to be so bad at like, filled out my checklist. I'm just going to sneak over to the next person. And I had to really make myself like, no, say goodbye. You like these people.
Yeah.
You want to be a good supervisor.
Yeah. Obviously,
Say
people
goodbye.
have not been doing it because it's in the book.
I mean, I think I've had supervisors where they come in, they watch me. They don't say they're watching me. They don't tell me what they want to see. They're not watching anything. I ask them, do you want to see anything? You want me to do anything? Nope, just watching. Okay, great. They don't give me any feedback. They don't say anything. Or maybe a week or 2 later, I hear, so no one's doing this right. And I know they mean me. Maybe they looked at other people. And all I can think is, why didn't you tell me 2 weeks ago? Why didn't you help me? And I'm just mad. And the last thing you want is your supervisees to be doing the best they can, and you're not supporting them. You're just sort of looking for things to get them in trouble for. Because supervisees know when supervisors do not care about them. And guess what? They will stop caring about their job. And as much as everyone says, I'm in human services because I love working with people with disabilities and I want to do everything I can for them, if they're in a situation where the supervisor just makes their lives miserable, it's really hard to keep that positive attitude going for very long. All right? So that's how you monitor.
Mm-hmm.
Easy peasy, right?
That was good. That was good advice.
Thank you so much. It's mostly from a book, but some of it I knew on my own. It's from the book we read. All right. Now, the last thing, just because we're kind of on the whole monitoring kick, we're skipping around a little bit. Don't be afraid. We wanted to kind of put all our positive feedback and positive ways to support your staff more just, I guess, happily as its own section. So, Jackie, you were gonna talk a little bit about correcting some poor performance when you see it.
I sure am. So I'm going to talk about how you might want to correct non-proficient work performance. So I love that when they're talking about this in the book, they're like, if you are following our evidence-based protocol for supervision, this will not happen to you.
Step 1, do chapters 1 to 5.
Right? If you've done 1 through 5 and you've done a good job and you're always monitoring your staff, if you're always providing corrective feedback in the moment and you're doing your behavioral skills training, then you will not have this problem.
You've nipped all the butts. There are no butts left to be nipped.
The butts. Yeah.
But you still could have these problems.
You could, but they're saying if you've done 1 through 5 greatly, like to excess, you don't really have those problems because usually the reasons why staff are not performing are 1, behavior isn't clearly specified. So that should have already happened, right? With your behavioral skills training, you should have some checklist or rubric. 2, the work is not being supported, so maybe you don't have resources to do the work that you're needing to do.
Mm-hmm.
And if you are a good supervisor, you would know that you needed those resources, and then you would modify the workplace so that the staff could either do those or you would change up what they were doing. A lack of skills to perform the job, that's your fault. Right? So
Nice job, jerk. That's your fault.
That's your fault, where if you didn't train them correctly or with enough practice in your modeling and your role play and your feedback or in your in vivo training, then obviously they can't do the skill.
Or maybe you need to teach some prerequisite skills to the skills.
Or maybe they're incapable of actually performing the job duties, meaning maybe physically they can't lift a 200-pound person.
Mm-hmm.
And if that's a case, then you just need to switch their job responsibilities around so they don't have to do those. So that could happen. I worked on a staff intensive unit where I was working with very large young men. And sometimes they were like, oh, you should physically guide them. I'm like, yeah, that's silly because I can't even move their fingers. So in that case, I actually didn't have to do that because it was silly of me. Then I had to go to the gym, worked out, got bigger. I did.
Right.
But that wasn't because of my work. Just because I wanted to have big muscles. And then, the hardest one, I think, is this lack of motivation. Right? So if you're following your evidence-based supervision protocol, you really can hit most of those other things, right? With training, with frequent monitoring, with critical feedback. Positive feedback with what they're doing right, performance feedback and practice with what they're not doing right. It's this lack of staff motivation that is, I think, more challenging because it's not a training issue. It's more of it's a different kind of issue, right? How do we know it's a lack of motivation? We go through the 5 steps. We know, they can do the skill. I've seen them perform the skill correctly. They're just not doing it.
I kind of like how in the book they talk about some ways to get to the bottom of that. Sort of like you've done your formal monitoring, and then maybe you came back and did some informal monitoring. And that's a way to figure out that they can always engage in the skill, or that they can engage in it when they know you're watching. And then when you kind of, come on back and check in, maybe they're not engaged in it.
Right, yeah. So here they say, try everything that you already know. Try steps 1 through 5. Go through the training. Go through the monitoring. You should never be punishing. You should always be, praising what they're specifically doing right, correcting what they're doing wrong. Give them extra time. And if that's still not working, say, okay, I'm going to give you these 2 things. Be very specific about what that's going to look like. And then after those 2 reviews, maybe that's what they've talked about, then you'll have to move to the disciplinary action. So I love in the book that they say that this should be an exception rather than the rule. I love that. And they do say that when you're providing this disciplinary feedback, you should be a vastly different supervisor than you normally are, which I love, right? Because sometimes you'll try to be like all buddy friendly in these meetings, be like, so you're not showing up to work and you're kind of sucking at your job. What are we going to do about it, right? Like, that's, I don't think, going to hit home as hard as if I was like, listen, here's my documentation that we've been working on this skill. It's not really working. You're not showing up. We need to take some action here. So here's what we're going to do. Here are the steps. Let's talk through them. Do you agree with them? Do you not agree with them? But maybe have more of a stricter stance than the soft, fuzzy supervisor.
Yeah. But I also like that they say take the time in these meetings to pause and get feedback from the staff.
Yep.
Because what could sometimes appear as lack of motivation could actually be a lot of other factors that we don't necessarily know about. Right. So they could be working 2 jobs. They could be trying to care for an ill parent or grandparent at home. They could be a single parent themselves.
Right.
They could be experiencing, depression or other mental illness that we need to get them help for.
But one thing I love about this book too is the outside influences of the staff are not your responsibility.
Yeah.
So that was a major thing, and I love that because what you're responsible for is good work performance for the benefit of your clients. So if you have an employee that does have some outside work struggles, it's not your responsibility to fix it.
No, but
you can refer them to get help, but you should never be like, oh, you can use my psychiatrist or psychologist. I'll come to your house and cook for your grandma. Like, that's sometimes I think new supervisors will try to solve their supervisee problems. Yeah. And I think that's a really important point, that it's not your problem if they're having outside things going on. You should be empathetic, but number 1, they still need to do their work.
Yeah. But creating a space for them, like they say, where hopefully they can, share that with you so that you can then assist them in getting the help that they might need and the support that they need.
I think that
was
important
good. Step.
Yeah. Another thing that I love about this chapter is they say if you are going to take disciplinary action on one of your supervisees, make sure your executive team knows before you do it. I think that's very funny. They're like, if you don't, they may not stand behind your decision, and then you'll look silly.
Yeah, and then the other piece, too, is depending on where you work, you may or may not be allowed to engage in any kind of disciplinary action.
Yeah.
And I know one of the great things about doing all the steps of evidence-based supervision is that when it is quote unquote time for discipline, you really have a meaningful paper trail. It's you know what you've been looking at has been observable.
Right.
It's been consistent. You've gone through all the steps multiple times, so no one can claim you have not been supported. So when you do say it's time for disciplinary action, you have a long paper trail to show that the problem is one that will require outside, either my disciplinary action or outside disciplinary action. Now, whether, depending where you work, you have people who then want to engage in that disciplinary
Right.
action. I've been in places
Yeah.
where that was the worst thing in the world. Like, oh, I don't want to, even though you've got all this stuff and you really tried, like, I don't want to just, can you just do
Right.
all that stuff again? I guess I could.
Yeah. And it's also important for you to know what the steps are. So know what what constitutes a termination versus a leave versus like an investigation. Like you should know all those things before you start throwing those terms out to your supervisors.
Yeah.
Oh my, yeah.
So if you have to do disciplinary action, you should let your executive team know that you're doing that. Get approval from them before you do that. Know the reasons why you're giving that disciplinary action, and then provide those specific objective reasons to the supervisee. One thing I never really thought of actually, but it's very true, to just be aware that for a little bit you're going to be seen as the bad guy with the other staff, right? So now I'm thinking about it, yeah, like they're like, oh, my friend, she fired my friend, I hate her. But, that's only temporary if you're a good supervisor, because then they'll see, that you're still the same old supervisor coming in, providing corrective feedback, but also, continually monitoring, making sure that everybody's doing the job, and they're doing probably less job now because they're no longer covering for that person that wasn't doing their job. So I think it's a good thing to be aware of as a supervisor, because I know if everyone really liked you and then everyone was more distant to you, that might be a little troubling for a new supervisor.
But I think as long as you're engaging in the steps that we've been talking about, you are doing a lot that is going to be really well received by staff. And so, they might say, oh, supervisors, oh, why didn't they give this person another chance? But I mean, come on, we've all worked with people who really just were not cut out for a job, or clearly were doing things that they shouldn't do. And as much as it always did feel like that, oh, I feel bad for them. I know when I was still kind of low on the totem pole, you knew the people who probably weren't going to make it in the field a little bit. So eventually, I think as long as you're following these steps, like you said, Jackie, people will come back around. They understand. They know that you're not trying to be mean, and they know you're not trying to be mean because you spend all this time supervising them effectively.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
So basically, the main take-home point of when you need to provide corrective feedback is that, or not like non-work performance, non-great work performance. That's the layman terms to say it. Is it shouldn't happen all that much. So if you're following your evidence-based protocol for supervision, you should really be focusing heavily on steps 1 through 5. And if it's a lack of staff motivation, you shouldn't be doing any disciplinary action until you've figured out the steps and why it's happening and tried to remedy it yourself.
Yeah.
But if you do have to take disciplinary action, such as like a formal review, a possible termination, you should let your agency know first. You should know the rules regarding that, and you should be very specific. And like you said, Rob, have your paper trail up so that you have evidence to support why you're making this claim. Yeah.
I think the book does a good job we hinted at it a lot, but sort of describing how this whole process sort of would play out as almost like an investigation. If you're doing good supervision, you're also doing kind of a just-in-case investigation at all times. So when you get to that point of we need disciplinary action, you really kind of know what the problem is, and you know it's not one that you necessarily can control the same way that you could control a skill deficit or a unclear job guideline.
Yeah. So I think that's really about it, is that if you're being a great supervisor, this should rarely happen. And if it does happen, you'll take it just as you would everyone. Take your objective data, present the facts to both your agency and the person, and then use whatever criteria you have that's already set. So it's not just going to be like, I'm going to fire you because I don't like you.
Your smell. I can't take it anymore.
And that's not to say that everyone who presents with the lack of motivation needs to be fired.
Oh, absolutely no. And they say you never would bring it up until you've gone through your steps. of the protocol.
Yeah. And you may have noticed through an informal observation, like, man, it feels like I know you can do your discrete trial training, but it feels like every time I'm in this room, there's like a million things going on, and there's too many therapists in the room. So I see you're not able to ever run these skills. That's why the data is so bad. You might actually catch, like, oh, the problem's not you can't do it. It's that there's some outside force making it impossible for you to do your job. We should change that, and now you feel happy about your job again.
And that's what we're going to talk about next week.
Mm-hmm.
Ways to make jobs better when you have an undesirable task.
Wow.
Cool.
So, no big dissemination station because this is kind of a different format for our episodes. What we do want to make sure we do is kind of a quick summary. But before we do that quick summary, if you are listening for continuing education credits of the supervision variety, our second secret code word is princess. 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 Like Belle or Elsa. Or Anna.
Or Ariel.
Or
Tiana.
Ariel. Or Tiana. Or Pocahontas. Or
so many princesses.
Lady.
Snow White.
Cinderella.
Jackie.
Jasmine.
All right, we got it.
Mowgli. Wait, no.
No.
Diana.
Baloo the bear. No. Damn. No princess in that one.
You got off track.
I got off track. Again, I'll start. We talked a lot about the training process. We talked about the steps of behavior skills training or proficiency-based training, competency-based training, and they are tell everyone the rationale and what they're going to be learning, have it written out in a format that your staff can take home with them, demonstrate the skill, role play the skill, or have your supervisees engage in the skill in vivo, give corrective feedback in the moment, and repeat until proficiency is reached. You want to keep monitoring skills, monitor more for new skills, and you can monitor a little less infrequently for skills that have been mastered or when you don't have any particular big concerns. You want to do formal monitoring when there's something you specifically want to see, and you are monitoring with your checklist, with those written lists in place, so you can clearly tell your staff that what it is you want to see and make sure that you are seeing it. You can monitor informally when you're sort of just in a classroom or in a setting and you sort of want to just check in, see how folks are doing. Always greet individuals when you are about to observe them and say goodbye when you're about to leave. Make sure you're using your checklist as need be. And then also make sure that if you're going to give feedback, you give it as close to when you did the monitoring as possible. Anyway, look right, as close to when you did the observation as possible. And if you cannot do that, well, let them know something positive and find a time that you can engage in more constructive or corrective feedback, I should say. If something crazy happens during your observation that is going to impinge on the safety of staff or students, maybe that's not the best time to do your formal monitoring. Decide whether you can help out or maybe you are the problem and you need to leave. But don't continue formal monitoring because it's embarrassing and doesn't tell you anything useful as well. And then always say goodbye, goodbye.
Don't embarrass yourself.
Don't embarrass yourself as a supervisor.
I can tell you about corrective feedback.
What about corrective feedback?
It shouldn't happen if you've been following your evidence-based protocol for supervision. But if it does, you want to make sure that you've documented it, you have fixed all of the problems, so you've made sure that the job description is accurate, you've made sure that the skills can be performed correctly, you've made sure that there's resources in place for the skill to happen, and then if it's a lack of staff motivation, you can figure out why and see if we can remedy the reasons for that. And if all of those fail, then you may have to take disciplinary action, but you should first inform your agency that you're going to do that so that they can stand behind you and know that sometimes after a disciplinary action, people will be a little colder to you for a little bit. But you should keeping on, following your evidence-based protocol for supervision, and you should be all set. Yeah.
You're not in this business to make friends.
No.
You're going to make the best human service agencies ever.
Yes. Cool. Thanks, guys.
Yeah.
Cool.
Well, that was part 2 of our supervision series. We hope you enjoyed kind of the change in format to talk about this very important topic. And honestly, it's one of those topics that I love reading about. I think we all love reading about it because it's kind of easy. It's kind of hard to wrap your mind around it to start. But once you start doing engaging in these behaviors, I think supervision is so much fun because you just feel like you know what you're paying attention to and you're doing things to support other people. When you think of supervision as a means of support, it's so much better than as what I always thought of supervision as when I first started, which is some sort of babysitting, or how do I get rid of the people that suck?
Right.
And if that's how you're supervising, you're not doing it right. I'm here to watch you. I'm waiting for you to do something wrong so I can immediately take disciplinary action.
At home.
Yeah, I put a camera somewhere in your workspace.
So at work, I love using Sharpie markers as my pens. I hardly ever use like a regular pen. And I've had people tell me that they thought that when I had the red pen out that they were doing something wrong. But that's not the case. And I would just pick that day, you know, like, oh, today I'm going to use the teal pen or the red pen or the purple pen.
Then you have to put hearts all over everything.
I guess so. So that just goes to show how like tuned in staff are to your behavior as a supervisor, and how much you have to be aware as well that what kinds of signals you're sending out.
If you got that red pen every time you observe, though, or it's always a different pen, and most of what you say is positive feedback, they'll learn, oh, Diana's the kind of supervisor that just does different pens. I shouldn't be so scared. But yeah, again, most of you, especially if you've been supervising a while, and especially if you're listening to this and saying things like, "Good, I've been doing that all wrong," yeah, your staff probably assume the worst when they see you. I'm sorry. Nothing personal. That's just how it goes.
Right.
But don't worry. You can change.
Behavior can change.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's it for our supervision episode. Next week, we'll be back. No preview episodes. It's just chock of information. Never stopping. Next week, we're going to talk about all the ways to positively support your staff beyond just the stuff we talked about, which also positively supports your staff. But you know what I mean.
We're going to bring donuts for everyone.
That's right.
Every day.
You get a donut. You get a donut.
And then I'm going to bring pizza for lunch. Make everybody overweight.
Hey, I love your smile. I've noticed you're not moving around as fast as you used to.
Have a donut.
Those sweatpants look great on you.
Thanks, guys.
All right, so you've been listening to ABA Inside Track Supervision September. That's not an effect. I just did that.
Okay,
Just off the
that's
cuff.
good.
Amazing.
Yep. You can find us online. We're on Apple Podcasts, on Stitcher, wherever you get your podcasts. Please leave us a review and subscribe to the show if you liked us. We do this every week. You can also find us online as ABA Inside Track. You can find us on Facebook and on Twitter. And you can email us at abainsidetrack@gmail.com with thoughts for topics, or just with any sorts of comments or corrections if we got anything wrong. Or fun anecdotes, because we love those too.
Or memes on our Facebook page.
Or memes on our Facebook page.
Visit us.
Yes, we have something. Usually have something there every day. I actually did find a bunch of good
You did.
clips. So I think we might have some fun supervision clips going up on the Facebook page, kind of
Nice.
the weeks that these episodes come out. So you might, I can't tell you what they are, but you should probably go check it out. All right. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you, Jackie. Thank you, Diana.
Thank you,
You
Robert.
bet.
We'll be back next week with our full-length episode again on supervision. But until then, keep responding.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye now.